What's up guys, Coach Az back again with the fundamental series, and today we're going to be going over the cross. The cross, being a straight back arm punch, is one of the first fundamental power strikes that you will learn, whether it be boxing, kickboxing, MMA, Muay Thai. So we're going to go over like we did with the jab. So if you haven't seen that video, I will link it up here somewhere or down here somewhere. We're going to be going through the fundamentals, some variations and some applications of this basic power punch. So let's get it started. So guys, let's start with the fundamentals of what a cross is and how we throw it. You might also hear this referred to as the straight right. That's coming from the point of view of being an orthodox fighter, which means you're fighting left stance and you're throwing the right hand as the rear arm, okay? There's plenty of variations of this punch, and you might have heard of different things such as an overhand, which sometimes can be considered a hooking punch or a cross. So I'm going to be covering as much of it as possible in this video, but let's start with the basics, how you'd probably learn it straight out. So guards are up. Often this is partnered with a jab. So jab being our lead arm straight arm punch, cross being our back arm straight arm punch. The basic fundamentals of it is that we go straight to the target and we come straight back to the head. And of course, the big thing is the rotation in the body. So the reason that this is a power punch is it affords you so much rotational force. From here, my ankle, my hip, and my shoulder pivot and rotate into this strike. So all of my body weight is rotating and going down my arm into this punch. So from the side on here, you can see it a bit better. From here, if you look at where my shoulder position starts, where my hip position starts, out and back. From here, out and back. All right, that's the fundamentals of how we throw it. Let's go over 3 common mistakes that people make when they're throwing the cross. These are going to be very similar to the ones that we did when throwing the jab, because they have very similar mechanics in terms of how they get to the target and come back. One is not understanding and managing the range for this technique, okay? So when I'm throwing my cross, I want to be on the end of my range, but it's my range without me losing my center of balance. So what I'm not doing is overreaching, where I'm going to be leaning over and bringing my center of balance in front of my hips. So from here, I'm overreaching with this punch, I'm off balance, I'm overcommitted, and I'm very vulnerable to being countered. At the same time, I don't want to underreach, so I don't want to be crowding my opponent and throwing it like this. This means that I'm not going to be able to utilize any of that rotational force we spoke about. I'm stuck in this small, tight range of motion. You'll see it thrown from time to time. You'll see the overreach thrown from time to time. But generally speaking, we want to keep our feet under us. We want to shoot that strike and pull it back, okay? Trying to keep our head underneath our shoulders. Straight out and straight back. The second part is that straight out, straight back part. So the way I like to teach it, especially to the kids, is you can go out to the shops, but then you have to come straight home. Yeah, did your mother ever tell you that? So my mum used to always tell me, yes, you can go out, but you go straight to the target, you go straight to where I've sent you, and you come straight home. There's no detour around the park. So I'm not punching and dropping my arm and bringing it back. It goes straight down the pipe. We want economy of motion when we punch, but we also want that economy of motion when we retract the technique and come back to our guard, okay? It's important that we start and finish in the same place. So from here, it's straight out and straight back. The way you'll see people doing it when they're getting it wrong is they're punching and then they're already coming back, but they're coming back on a different line. So they start coming back down and then bringing the punch back up. Or they punch and they admire the technique. They leave their arm out there too long. Remember, if you're punching, it means you can't defend with that arm. So if this arm is out doing something, it means this side of me especially is vulnerable. So we need to be really careful, because if they've slipped that punch, if they've made it miss, you now have big openings for them to capitalize on. The last mistake is getting carried away with the idea of it being a power punch and loading up on it. So what I mean by this is you're pulling this punch back in order to generate even more force and then driving it into the target, thus making it really easy to read. Remember, your cross already has a lot further to travel than your jab. So if my jab goes from here, it's a shorter distance than this one that's got to travel twice as far to get to the target. So if I'm then pulling it back, all I'm doing is adding to the distance. And all I'm really doing is adding to the time it takes to shoot that strike. Have faith in the technique and the speed, and that will develop the power. You don't need to load up the punch, draw it back in order to slam it into that target. So have faith in good technique, in good rotational force and speed, and power will come. Don't load back on the shot. From there, straight out, straight back. Straight out, straight back. So now that we've got the fundamentals, let's look at some variations. So like I said at the start of the video, there's a couple of different ways to throw this punch, and none of them are right or wrong, but they are suitable for different situations. So let's go through a couple. Some you might be familiar with, some a little less. Starting with the straight hand right. So this is, you'll often hear people refer to this as a separate punch from the cross. All we're really talking about here is what we practiced in the fundamentals. It's that corkscrewing motion with the hand, and as that hand corkscrews, I'm going straight to my target and I'm coming straight back to my guard. So taking advantage of that rotational force, going straight in and straight back. Now this can be partnered with stuff, and we're going to talk about that later in the application section of this video. But for now, all I want you to practice is from that guard position, having that back arm from that chin, that corkscrew motion with the hand, so that by the time it lands, your hand has been rotated and is sideways on. And as it retracts, it corkscrews back as you tuck that elbow back in and bring that hand back to the chin. Straight out and straight back to the target. The second variation, very similar with a small tweak, and I don't see this one getting used enough. Here we're going to do what I call a thumbs up jab. All that means is if I had my thumb up when I punched, my thumb would be up in the air. So here, instead of that corkscrew motion coming round and bringing my fist sideways on, I'm going to keep my hand straight up and go straight out and straight back in. Now, especially in disciplines such as kickboxing or boxing, where you're using a larger glove, and it means it's a lot easier for people to create shells and create big bits of defense, it can be a lot more difficult to slip that rotational glove through those gloves, through that target. So if I come straight up through the middle, you see how narrow this is? It's much easier to slip this up between someone's guard and up and through to land a punch. Now, you might lose some of the power that comes from that corkscrewing motion, from that rotation. But if you can land this past the guard, you can create openings and you can start to break down the defense of your opponent. So keep everything else the same. We're still rotating the hips and shoulders. The only difference now is instead of twisting that hand, think of keeping the thumb up. Straight out and straight back. Straight out, straight back. Especially effective when you see people turtling up here and they leave this little gap to see in between. You wouldn't be able to fit the glove through horizontally, but turn it straight up, comes straight through. Maybe less of an issue if you're in MMA and you've got a much smaller glove, but even there, now we've created this even more streamlined version of this punch. The last variation I'm going to show you is the overhand right. So this is often for some people referred to as a form of a hook punch, but I think depending on how you throw it and how you lengthen your arm, it can be very much considered a cross. In this instance, instead of keeping my elbow underneath my shoulder, I'm going to bring my elbow up over. So the idea being here that our line of attack, instead of coming through the center or down and up, it's coming over and down. So we're coming above the guard and we're trying to come down onto the chin or down onto the temple. Especially when you've got people who like to shell up and bring their shoulder up and create all of this, it can be very difficult to come straight at this. You end up hitting a lot of this defense. But if we can come over the top, we can take advantage of that opening. So from here, as I throw it, I'm gonna twist that arm over, and I'm really looking for that elbow to come over my shoulder position. From there, over the top and twist in. That rotational movement of the hand comes back, and if anything, it rotates a little further to compensate for the new angle. So from here, on a more conventional cross, I'm fine horizontal. But when I get into this overhand and I'm twisting more, I want to bring that thumb slightly past that 90-degree angle and go a little bit lower. From there, overhand, fire, and down. And you'll notice that my head naturally steps off that side. So that natural motion of my head is also assisting with putting the body weight behind the punch. So rotating me and committing in. Now you'll notice this is a very committed punch. So it is a bit of a haymaker. It is a bit of a kind of last call technique, but if it lands, it can be devastating and extremely effective. Alright, so now that we know the fundamentals and we've got some variations of the strike, let's go into a few applications of how we can use it in the fight. Starting with the step-off cross. So always remember that if you're in range to hit someone with your cross, it often means, more often than not, that they're in range to hit you with theirs. And if you're going to go cross for cross, it's then going to come down to the speed of the technique. And we don't really want to be playing chicken with our opponent. We want to be a bit smarter than that, use a bit more tactics when we're working our fighting technique. So from here, the step-off cross involves us taking that front foot and stepping it out. And you see how my head has moved off that center line? If you see the bag behind me, use that as like a measuring point. So from here, as I step with that front foot, I've come off that line and then I shoot my cross, or even as I step, I shoot my cross. The idea being here that as we attack with our attack, we're also removing our target from where it originally started from. From there, step and fire. This is especially effective against an open stance fighter, which means if I'm orthodox and you're a southpaw, when I do this step, not only do I step off the power of your punch, but I line your head up with the power of mine. So I've gone into a safer point of attack, and also I've put you in a far more vulnerable space for when that punch comes straight down the pipe and back. So again, you can practice this in two ways. It can either be step and then punch, but far more effective is being able to combine footwork and punching at the same time. Step and punch. As you step, you're already initiating that strike to the target. All right, application number 2 is the sliding counter cross. So here we're using a motion moving backwards to create some space between us and our opponent and bring them into our rear hand. So I'm working a sliding motion back. I'm using my lead arm as almost like my radar. So I'm looking and using it to measure my distance on my opponent, manage their guard, create the opening to then strike with my cross. You've seen Conor McGregor effectively use this against Jose Aldo, amongst others. The idea being here that as someone overcommits to us, we drive ourselves back, and where our target was is now replaced with our fist, meeting them as they're oncoming, so generating a great amount of force. And as I said with the step off one, we can work it as a 1-2, but as equally, if not more effective, is as we're sliding, we're already initiating that strike. You're going to lose some of the power from the technique because you're moving whilst punching. But what you've got to consider is that your opponent is moving at you. So they generate a lot of the force for you by walking into the technique. So from here, we slide back and punch, or we slide back and punch in one motion. This last one is moving away from the more conventional ideas of what a cross is, and we're going to be implementing what's known as a Superman punch. Georges St-Pierre was famous for throwing this with the jab, but the more conventional way of throwing this technique is actually with the cross. So when you take a Superman punch and you break it down, really the fundamentals of it is a cross punch. But what we're doing is we're throwing it off of a hopping motion with the lead leg. So I will show this to you on the other camera angle, but while we've got it here, I'm gonna lean over on that front foot, pick this back foot up, and as I hop, I shoot that back arm cross into my target. So from here, it's all about, here we're breaking all the rules. So I am overcommitting, I am leaning my head over my shoulders, and from there I'm using that to create forward momentum. The idea of this technique is it allows us to cover a large distance. It's unorthodox in the way it's presented, so it's difficult for opponents to know how to react and how to respond to it. So it can often create openings that otherwise wouldn't be there. From there, I lean in, pop, and shoot that cross. Now if it lands, it's extremely powerful and extremely effective. It's got a lot of force coming behind it because you're effectively falling into that punch. If it doesn't land, it brings you into a closer range. So if you've been effective with it and you've got on the inside, you can then follow that up into a takedown, change levels. If you're striking, elbows, knees, kicks, etc. So guys, those are 3 applications for the punch. Take them, practice them, and see how you go. As always, the same as I said with the jab, the best way to get better at this is to practice. Get on the bag, get on some pads. If you've got someone you can work with, get in some sparring and build it up over time. Remember that basics win fights. So practice these fundamental techniques and get them into your game, and I'll see you on the next one.